Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. If you're studying English language education or maybe preparing to become an English teacher someday, today's episode is especially for you. Let me start with a simple question. Have you ever entered a classroom and thought, why does this lesson feel boring? Or maybe you ask yourself, why do some lessons feel exciting while others feel like just reading from a textbook? Well, the answer often lies in teaching materials. Good teaching materials can turn an ordinary lesson into something engaging and meaningful. But poor materials can make even a great teacher struggle. So today we are going to talk about something very important for future teachers. How to develop effective teaching sources and materials. But don't worry, this won't feel like a university lecture. Think of this episode as a conversation about how teachers design learning experiences. And in this episode, we will explore five key ideas. First, understanding our students. Second, the theories behind teaching materials. Third, the different types of materials teachers use. Fourth, the process of creating materials. And finally, how teachers evaluate whether their materials work or not. All right, let's start with something very important. Knowing your students. Before creating any teaching materials, a teacher must ask one fundamental question. Who are my students? Sounds simple, right? But actually, this is where many teaching problems begin. Sometimes teachers prepare materials based on what they want to teach, not on what students actually need. And that's why we need something called needs analysis. Needs analysis basically means finding out the gap between what students know now and what they need to learn. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine you are teaching English to vocational school students. Ask yourself, are they learning English for academic purposes? Or maybe they need English for future jobs. Maybe they need English for tourism, technology, or customer service. See the difference? The materials should match the real needs of the learners. And here's something interesting. Needs analysis doesn't have to be complicated. You can simply ask your students questions like, why do you want to learn English? Where do you usually use English? What part of English is the most difficult for you? Speaking, grammar, listening. When teachers ask these questions, something amazing happens. Students feel heard. And when students feel heard, they become more motivated to learn. But understanding students goes beyond just needs analysis. Teachers should also look at the whole learner profile. For example, how old are the students? What is their educational background? What is their cultural environment? How confident are they when speaking English? Are they shy? Are they active? Some students love speaking activities. Others prefer writing. Some students enjoy teamwork. Others prefer working independently. A good teacher recognizes these differences. Now let's connect this idea to something happening in Indonesia today. You may have heard about Curriculum Merdeka. This curriculum actually reflects the idea of student-centered learning. Instead of forcing a student to learn in the same way, Curriculum Merdeka encourages teachers to design learning based on students' characteristics and needs. For example, students can learn through projects, through investigations, through real-world problem solving. Teachers are also given more freedom to design their own teaching modules. And honestly, this is both exciting and challenging because freedom means responsibility. Teachers must be able to create materials that are relevant and meaningful. And that is why learning about material development is so important for future teachers. Now you might wonder, do teachers just create materials randomly? Actually, no. Behind every teaching method, there are educational philosophies and learning theories. Let's talk about three important learning theories. The first one is behaviorism. Behaviorism believes that learning happens through practice and repetition. So when students repeat pronunciation drills or practice grammar patterns again and again, that's behaviorism. The second theory is cognitivism. This theory focuses on how the brain processes information. Teachers using this approach help students understand ideas through concept maps, explanations, and problem solving. The third theory is constructivism. This one is very popular in modern education. Constructivism says that students build knowledge through experience. So instead of just listening to the teacher, students learn by doing activities. For example, group discussion, role play, projects, problem-solving tasks. In modern language teaching, teachers often combine these three approaches. Practice for basic skills, thinking activities for understanding, real-life tasks for communication. Now let's talk about the material themselves. Teaching materials can come in many forms. Some are traditional, like textbook, worksheet, and printed modules. Others are modern, like YouTube videos, podcasts, language apps, and interactive quizzes. But there's also another interesting classification. In education, we often talk about authentic materials and graded materials. Authentic materials are real-world materials. For example, a news article, a restaurant menu, a podcast episode, a travel vlog. These materials show students how English is actually used in real life. On the other hand, graded materials are designed specifically for learners. They simplify vocabulary and grammar so students can understand and content more easily. Good teachers often combine both. Maybe start with graded materials, then slowly introduce authentic materials. This helps students move from learning English to using English. Now let's imagine you are a teacher preparing a lesson. Where do you start? Many instructional designers use a framework called ADDIE, ADDIE. ADDIE has 5 steps: analyze, design, develop, implement, evaluate. First, analyze the learners. Second, design the lesson objectives. Third, develop the materials. Fourth, implement them in class. And finally, evaluate them. And here's something important. Material development is not a one-time process. It's a cycle. Teachers constantly improve their materials based on experience. Finally, we arrive at evaluation. After using teaching materials, teachers must ask, did the materials actually work? Did students understand the lesson? Were they engaged? Did they achieve the learning objectives? Teachers usually use two types of evaluation. First is formative evaluation. This happens during the learning process. For example, when teachers observe students during activities and give feedback. The second is summative evaluation. This happens at the end of unit or course. For example, tests or final projects. There is also a comprehensive evaluation framework called CIPP. It stands for Context, Input, Process, Product. This model helps teachers evaluate not just the result, but also the entire teaching process. So what can we learn from all this? Developing teaching materials is not simply about preparing slide or worksheet. It is about understanding learners, applying educational theory, designing meaningful activities, and continuously improving teaching practice. And as education moves toward more student-centered learning, teachers must also become more creative and reflective material developers. Because at the end of the day, great teaching material don't just teach English. They help students think, communicate, and connect with the world. Thank you for listening to today's episode. And before we end, let me ask you one last question. If you were designing your own English lesson today, what kind of material would you create for your students? Think about it. And maybe that idea could become your next great teaching resource. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.